Dear colleagues, pandemic times require special arrangements. But for you, I'm going to take my face mark off, and I'm very pleased and thank you for the invitation to speak to you about the UN Decade of Ocean Sciences for Sustainable Development. My name is Martin Vispeck. I work at GEOMA, the Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research, and Kiel University, and I'm the member of the executive planning group for the decade. And it is my great pleasure and honor to inform you a little bit about what the planning is and where we are in this process. About 2 years ago, in December of 2017, or almost 3 years ago by now, the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, with a document that was called The Ocean We Need for the Future We Want. Specifically, it is about the science we need for the ocean we want, and the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO was tasked to put together the process and the plan to advance this idea of this UN Ocean Decade. After a couple of initial works, an interim group, finally the executive planning group was assembled. There are about 19 experts from around the globe, and many of them you know, which are certainly friends of the ocean, friends of the also Ocean Science Program, the Global Ocean Observing System Program. And what this group was tasked to do is to develop an implementation strategy and plan for the decade, which it did, and it actually just submitted the implementation plan to the General Assembly. What the decade is all about is trying to do the step change, the transformative change from the science where we are to the science we would like to be. For example, right now, the science is largely competent for problem diagnostic, and we like to have a science which is more looking at solutions, providing solutions and motivation for action. We have an observing system for climate and emerging data services that certainly Ocean Science knows all about. But we would like to upgrade that to a more adequate ocean data and information system with much more sustained resources behind it. We have major knowledge gaps in the ocean and around society. The society is, we think, weak in ocean literacy. So we would like to see an ocean literate society that supports well-informed decision-making. Certainly, most of our funding, in particular in observing, is mostly research mode. There's good things about it, but we really would like to have much more recognition of the value chain, and in particular, ocean observations should be more sustainable and more fundamentally base funded as part of society's value. There's a huge gap in capacity between the global north and the global south, and what we need is a much more engagement in the transfer of action, activity, and capabilities from the global north to the global south. And I think Ocean Science is doing some really laudable steps in that direction. So just a while ago, the first version of the implementation plan was drafted and the final version has just been submitted. And let me just give you a few highlights from that. As I said, the vision and the mission is really the science we need for the ocean we want. And we're looking at transformative science, solution-oriented, that really supports sustainable development in all aspects of where the ocean is concerned. And really, it's about connecting people and the ocean in a much more direct, professional, science-based way. The decade has articulated 7 outcomes, which have issues on their mind, like a clean ocean, a healthy and resilient ocean, a productive ocean, a predicted ocean, a safe ocean, an accessible ocean, and also an inspiring and engaging ocean. And I think in particular, the accessible and predicted oceans are on the minds of ocean science communities, which is really about knowing what is going on in the ocean, shining a light into the ocean, getting key information and data available to support science, decision-making, and society in general. The decade framework as such has these outcomes on the top, as I just mentioned, but then also looks at decadal challenges. So I'll give you a glimpse of that in a minute. And then through the objectives gets to decadal actions. So decadal challenges are around scientific research agendas, questions like what are the pollutants and contaminants in the ocean? What are the solutions to protect, monitor, and manage and restore ecosystems and their biodiversity? How can we sustainably feed the world's population also from the ocean perspective? What are equitable and sustainable development options of the blue-green economy? Issues around the ocean climate nexus and the understanding of that. It's about multi-hazard warning systems that go along with that, but also about ocean observing systems, which is certainly dear to the heart of the ocean science community and the goose community, a digital representation of the ocean, the digital earth, digital oceans come into mind, but also the capacity development and equitable access to data, information, platforms, knowledge generation, and last but not least, to identify and overcome barriers to the non-sustainable behavior of our human community against the ocean or how we exploit the ocean. So these give you some ideas of the challenges that the decade has and wants to address. And the objectives, the way we're going to do that is that the first objective is really to increase the capacity and capabilities to generate, understand, and manage the ocean knowledge. We need to step up our identification and generate the required data, information, and knowledge against some of these challenges. We want to build a comprehensive understanding of the ocean governance systems in particular, but also increase the use of ocean knowledge in decision-making and governance in general. So these are higher level objectives that frame the decade together with the key challenge areas and the outcomes. Now, the concrete engagements for activities like the Global Ocean Observing Systems are in terms of actions. And the actions have 4 levels. One is a decade program, global in scale, more than one objectives, long-term, multi-year activity. One is a decade project, a little bit more focused, maybe a little bit shorter term, maybe more regional in scale, maybe a contribution to a program. And then an activity which is in support of programs and objectives, short-term, one-off contribution to the decade, and then the financial contribution through resources for the planning, but also the execution of the decade as such. So the decade is a multi-stakeholder decade, so we want really full engagement of many stakeholders. So these are regional, sectoral, thematic stakeholders. There's implementing partners, which could be governments, private sector, NGOs, citizen science, and so on. And then there's also 2 institutions, the Decadal Alliance, that's going to help to provide to support mechanisms financially and otherwise, resources for the decade, but also national decade committees that help to shape up the engagement and agenda of our nations. So last but not least, we're in this milestone slide somewhere in September where the plan of the implementation plan is presented to the member states of the General Assembly. By the end of the year, we expect hopefully a support of the General Assembly for the decade, and that's a formal step that is required to execute it so that in the 1st of January of 2021, the decade can start, 10-year program. In February, we're going to have regional kickoff meetings, but also a global meeting in Berlin at the end of May and June. So we're really seeing engagement into launching the decade. And maybe an important step is that by the next months, we'll launch a first call for global programs for engagement, and we'll see what we get. And that is open to the end of January, but many more calls will follow in the years to come. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I think the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is a tremendous opportunity to provide visibility and also to change the way as scientists also we do our science and interact with the ocean. And I think also the Ocean Science Program has a lot to gain from visibility and engagement with the decade. Thank you very much.